Claire, what if we never have a child? What if I never become a dad? Mark's voice cracked, heavier than ever. I looked into his eyes and saw someone different, a man carrying an unbearable weight. We'll find a way, Mark. It's not the end of our world, I said, clutching his hand. But as the days went by, I couldn't help but sense the urgency creeping in. I watched as parents strolled with their kids in the park, and my chest tightened with longing. I carried a silent hope each month, only for it to shatter like thin glass. Eventually, we decided to see a specialist. The examination room was sterile, too white and too bright. The doctor's words echoed painfully. Claire, your fertility is quite low. The chances are slim. Mark stared at the floor, not saying a word as we walked to the car. His silence was like a cold wall between us. On the drive home, he finally spoke. That's it then? His voice was barely above a whisper. I squeezed his knee gently. We'll explore options, Mark. We have to. Weeks turned into months and nothing changed. Mark became more withdrawn, more distant. His eyes had lost their warmth, turning cold and abyss-like. We used to talk about everything, but now our conversations were filled with sighs and empty words. One day, while strolling through the park, he stopped suddenly, watching a group of kids playing. If I had a kid, we'd be at that park every weekend, he muttered, the bitterness unmistakable. Mark. I started, but he just shook his head and walked ahead. Then came the fateful announcement. We were having dinner when he dropped the bombshell. I need to transfer to another state for this new project. Claire, I think it's best if I handle this alone. I felt the ground shaking beneath me. Alone? You mean you'll be moving? He nodded, not meeting my eyes. It's just until the project is complete. Maybe some distance will do us good. I wanted to scream, to fight, but instead I just nodded. All right, maybe it will. Mark packed his things the next morning. The house felt abandoned without him. His side of the bed went cold, and the nights became unbearable. In his absence, I tried to cling to hope. He visited occasionally, bringing gifts and smiling gently like the old Mark I knew. But those moments were fleeting, illusions that faded faster than they appeared. His calls grew sparse, his messages brief. Each day, I wondered if our bond was disintegrating beyond repair. I clutched my phone, waiting for it to buzz with a message, a sign, anything. But hope, much like the children we never had, remained elusive. Weeks turned into months, and the house grew emptier. I couldn't help but hear our unspoken words echoing through the silent rooms, filling the void left behind by fading promises and vanishing dreams. Mark's return wasn't the joyous occasion I'd hoped. I could sense the shift in him immediately. He moved around the house like a ghost, his presence more of a haunting than a comfort. It was a Sunday afternoon when the first blow landed. We were walking back from the grocery store when we passed a dad pushing his child on a swing. If I had a kid, we'd be at that park every weekend, he said, louder this time, almost daring me to respond. Mark, we've talked about this, I said softly, trying to keep the peace. We've talked, but nothing changes, he snapped. What's the point anymore? The sharpness of his words stung, and I swallowed my retort, unwilling to escalate the argument in public. The silence between us grew thicker, filled not with unspoken affection but with unaddressed grievances. Then came the announcement. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when he dropped it on me. I've been transferred. I need to go to Chicago for the next project. When? My hand stopped mid-cut. Next week, he said, not looking up from his phone. I'm leaving Monday. I felt a pang of betrayal. So soon. What about us, Mark? Don't we need to talk about this? There's nothing to talk about, Claire. This could be good for us, he sighed. Maybe some distance will help. I wanted to fight, but the fatigue settled in instead. All right, if that's what you think. He packed hastily that weekend, and Monday came too quickly. The goodbye was mechanical, a quick peck and a mumbled, "Take care," before he walked out the door. Weeks turned into months. Phone calls were brief, and his words were laced with indifference. He didn't ask about my days, didn't care if I was lonely. The only time he seemed animated was when he talked about work. One rare evening, he FaceTimed me from his new apartment. Met some colleagues' families today, he said, filling the space with meaningless chatter. You should have seen their kids, Claire. It made me think, you know. He paused, eyes narrowing. Maybe the problem isn't just fertility. Maybe. I straightened up, feeling the sting of his insinuation. What are you trying to say? Forget it. And was that he waved off my concern. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was something large and looming, an elephant in the room simply refusing to acknowledge its presence. Claire, I think it's best if I extend my stay, he said during another cold clinical phone call. The project needs more time, and I can't be distracted. I knew it was a lie. Fine, I replied, but the word felt like swallowing a stone. Our love had become a series of unspoken accusations and unmet expectations, two people orbiting around the same pain without ever addressing it directly. And though I still wore my wedding ring, it felt more like a shackle than a promise. His absence became my constant companion, a relentless reminder of dreams deferred and love eroded by time and disillusionment. When the weekends came, I would sit in the park alone, watching families that could have been ours, feeling the cold winds of impending change. Mark's visits home were infrequent, but strategically timed. Birthdays, anniversaries, the occasional holiday. He came back with expensive presents, trying to paper over the growing cracks in our relationship. One Wednesday evening, he surprised me with a necklace, delicate and glittering under the kitchen lights. "Do you like it?" he asked, his voice oddly eager. I admired the necklace, but something inside me hesitated. "It's beautiful, Mark," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you." He seemed content with my response, quickly moving on to talk about his work in Chicago. "The project is going well. They're even considering me for a promotion." "That's great," I said, trying to match his enthusiasm, but all I could think was how this may only mean more time apart. The visits became a hollow routine. He'd bring gifts, we'd exchange pleasantries, and then he'd leave again. Each time, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I married, only for it to vanish by the time he unpacked his suitcase in Chicago. He called one night, more animated than usual. The project might be extended, he said, not even bothering to mask the enthusiasm in his voice. This could mean big things for us. For us or for you? I couldn't help but question. "Come on, Claire. It's all connected," he shot back, irritation edging his words. I sighed, the weight of everything pressing down. "Whoa, Mark, when will this end?" He didn't have an answer, just more empty words about career opportunities and our supposed future. The hopes I clung to were growing thinner, just like his visits. One Friday, after not hearing from him for weeks, he showed up at our doorstep. "Thought I'd surprise you," he said, holding out a small box. Another trinket, another attempt to glue the pieces back together with material things. "Thank you," I murmured, accepting the gift but feeling none of the joy I once did. Later that evening, we sat on the couch, the silence oppressive. Mark fiddled with his phone, barely engaging in the forced small talk. "Maybe once this assignment wraps up, we can go on a trip," he suggested. "Are you sure you'll even be free, Mark?" The skepticism slipped out before I could stop it. His eyes flashed with annoyance. "Why do you always have to be so negative? I'm doing this for us." "For us," I repeated. "Or for you?" He stood up abruptly. "Fine. If you can't appreciate anything I'm doing, maybe it's better if I stay away longer." His words hit like a punch. "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. He paused, staring at me for a moment before replying, "Maybe it is. Maybe some real distance will help us figure things out." And with that, he left just as quickly as he had come. Alone in the quiet house, I turned over his words, trying to find meaning in the chaos our lives had become. I watched the clock, each passing minute a reminder of the increasing distance between us. Our marriage, held together by fragile gifts and broken promises, was slowly unraveling, leaving me with nothing but the lingering scent of his cologne and a growing sense of impending change. Mark returned unexpectedly on a Saturday morning, a tight grip on his briefcase and an expression I couldn't read. I stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping my hands on a towel. "Mark, what's wrong?" He exhaled sharply. "We need to talk." My heart sank as I led him to the living room. We sat down, the tension thick in the air. Without preamble, he said, "There's a colleague of mine who can't raise her baby. She's looking for someone to adopt. Should we consider it?" His sudden proposal stunned me. "Adopt? Without even discussing this? Who is she?" "The mother isn't important, Claire," he said, voice rising defensively. "The baby needs a home." "Of course, the mother matters, Mark. How can we adopt a child without knowing anything about the situation?" His eyes narrowed, the intensity of his gaze almost suffocating. "Why does it matter who the parents are? Do you want this or not?" I felt cornered, the weight of his ultimatum pressing down on me. I need time to think, Mark. This isn't a decision we can make overnight. He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. Well, think quickly. I need an answer soon. We discussed adoption again late into that night, the atmosphere fraught with tension. I just think we should meet her, at least know her story, I ventured, trying to keep my voice steady. Claire, why can't you just trust my judgment for once? I know what's best for us. His words felt like a slap. It's not about trust, Mark. This is a huge decision, and we need to be sure. He slammed his hands on the table, making the dishes clatter. If you can't accept this, we're done. The finality in his voice left little room for negotiation. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. All right, I said quietly. I'll gather my things. I moved through the house mechanically, packing my belongings into suitcases and boxes. Mark watched, his face unreadable, offering no help and no words. By the time the sun rose, I was packed and ready to leave. As I stood at the door, I looked back one last time. I'll contact a lawyer about the divorce, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Fine, he replied, turning away. I found temporary shelter in a small apartment, its walls closing in on me like the confines of my own despair. The dull hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city were my only companions. The following days were a blur of legal paperwork and muted conversations with my attorney. We'll make this quick, she reassured me. And so it was. The divorce process moved swiftly, and I started looking for a new job to avoid any chance encounters with Mark at the office we once shared. A legal assistant position opened up, and I grabbed at the opportunity like a lifeline. In the sterile confines of the law firm, I found some semblance of routine. Sarah, my new boss, was kind and understanding, sensing but not prying into my recent turmoil. The work was demanding, but gave me little time to dwell on my broken marriage. Through the long hours and cold nights, I began to rebuild. Mark's shadow still loomed, but with each passing day, I learned to navigate my new reality with a fragile yet growing resilience. It had been weeks since I moved into my tiny apartment, yet the memories of my life with Mark clung to me stubbornly. One evening, I was sorting through old photographs when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. We need to talk. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. He sat there, looking more haggard than I remembered. Claire, there's something I need to tell you. What's it now, Mark? I asked, my patience worn thin. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. The adoption option, it's off the table. Why? I asked, heart pounding. What happened? She changed her mind, he replied, looking away. I should have told you sooner. Anger bubbled up inside me. You put me through all that for nothing? Do you even realize how much you hurt me? He sighed deeply, as if he were the victim. I'm sorry, okay? Things just got complicated. Complicated, I echoed, shaking my head in disbelief. That's all you have to say? Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, let's not dwell on the past. How are you doing? The question was a slap in the face, his attempt at small talk unbearable. I'm moving on, Mark. Unlike you, I can't afford to linger in the past. I left the cafe feeling no better, but with a renewed sense of determination. Our meeting was the push I needed to let go of any lingering hopes that things might ever change. The next few weeks flew by with work being my only solace. Each legal document I processed felt like a step further from my old life. One day, during lunch, Sarah approached me. You seem more focused these days, she noted, handing me a fresh stack of papers. Just keeping busy, I replied, giving a small smile. Later that day, my phone rang. It was Mark again, his voice strained. Claire, I found out something disturbing. What now, Mark? I asked, not bothering to hide my annoyance. I think the baby, it might not even be mine, he stammered. For a moment, his words didn't make sense. Then the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. You had an affair, didn't you? I demanded. He hesitated before admitting, yes. Rage and betrayal coursed through me. You coward! All this time, you blamed me for everything when you were the one lying. I'm sorry, he whispered, but it was too little, too late. Fury sharpened my resolve. The next day, I marched into Sarah's office. I need to file a claim for infidelity compensation, I stated. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll handle it. Are you prepared for this? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. We sent the legal claim to Mark and his mistress, Lauren. The response was immediate and aggressive. Lauren called me, her voice dripping with contempt. You think you can just take what's mine? You deserve every bit of this, I replied calmly. You both do. As we hung up, I knew the battle had only just begun. Mark had sown the seeds of his own destruction, and now it was time for him to reap what he had sown. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but at least it was one I was willing to walk alone, with my head held high. Weeks turned into months, and life began to return to a kind of normalcy in my small apartment and new routine. The past seemed increasingly distant until the day I entered the lobby of the law firm and saw Mark, clutching a baby in his arms. What are you doing here? My voice came out harsher than I intended. Mark's eyes widened with shock, quickly masked by frustration. I need your help, he said, desperation creeping into his tone. I motioned him to follow, leading him to a vacant conference room. Make it quick, Mark, I said, closing the door behind us. The baby. I'm not sure she's mine, he confessed, looking out of place with the infant in his arms. My mind raced, recalling our last fiery exchange. You want a test, don't you? Yes, he admitted, unable to meet my gaze. Sarah joined us then, her presence commanding and reassuring. What's going on here? Mark explained the situation, but his words were cold and clinical, devoid of genuine remorse. I need to know if she's my daughter, he concluded. That can be arranged, Sarah said, flipping through her notes. I couldn't hold back any longer. How do you live with yourself, Mark, dragging an innocent child into this mess? He looked at me, expression hardening. This is not about you, Claire. This is about what's right for the child. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah intervened, keeping the conversation on track. We'll move forward with the test. You should hear back in a few weeks. Mark mumbled a thank you and left, taking the fragile remnants of our past with him. I watched him go, wondering what had happened to the man I once knew. Those weeks dragged on, filled with a new kind of anticipation. When the results finally came in, Sarah called me into her office. Claire, the child is not his, she said, her tone neutral. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. So he lied about everything, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Seems that way, Sarah said. What do you want to do now? I thought about it, the weight of the situation weighing heavily. I want to move forward with the infidelity compensation. He needs to face the consequences. Sarah nodded, her expression approving. We'll proceed. The legal process was swift, delivering a solid blow to Mark and Lauren. Lauren's reaction was immediate. She stormed into the firm one morning, rage radiating off her. You can't do this. You don't know what he means to me. I met her eyes, unflinching. I know enough to know he deserves this. She left in a fury, but the damage was done. Mark's world began to crumble, and I watched from the sidelines, a complicated mix of relief and lingering sadness within me. Walking away from the situation, I felt a newfound sense of closure. Mark had been exposed, his lies unraveling like the life we once shared. The path ahead was still long, but for now I felt the first breath of freedom in a long time. In those quiet moments, with the dust of the past settling, I found strength in how far I had come. The scars were there, reminders of battles fought and won, but I was ready to embrace the new life that lay ahead, free from the chains of deceit and betrayal. The days following Lauren's fiery visit were filled with a tense anticipation. I knew the infidelity compensation case was moving forward, but each passing day felt like walking on a knife's edge. One evening as I was about to leave the office, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Claire, we need to go over some details, she said firmly. I made my way to her office, where she greeted me with a stack of papers. Mark and Lauren are fighting this with everything they've got, she explained. We need to be prepared for their counter-arguments. I nodded, steeling myself. What's their defense? Typical tactics, questioning your motives, trying to paint you as vindictive, she said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. But we've got solid evidence. Stay strong. The courtroom was a battleground. Mark and Lauren sat on one side, their eyes cold and accusing. I sat across from them, every nerve in my body on high alert. Their lawyer stood up first. This case isn't about justice, it's about revenge. Claire's trying to ruin Mark's life out of spite. Sarah rose to counter, her voice strong and unwavering. This is about accountability. Mark deceived Claire, leading a double life. The emotional and financial damages are clear. Mark took the stand, his face a mask of false humility. I made mistakes, but Claire's actions are extreme, he said, voice dripping with false regret. She's trying to take everything from me. I could barely look at him, the man who once held my heart, now a stranger cloaked in lies. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath. Mark broke our marriage vows, not out of some sudden lapse, but through sustained deceit. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. Lauren's testimony was next, her voice full of indignation. I never meant to hurt anyone, she claimed, tears glistening in her eyes. Mark loves our baby, even if she isn't his. This case is ruining our lives. I clenched my fists, my anger barely contained. Sarah noticed and gave me a slight nod, her silent support bolstering my resolve. After hours of exhausting testimonies and cross-examinations, the judge finally gave the verdict. Given the compelling evidence of infidelity and deception, I rule in favor of the plaintiff, Claire Parker. Compensation in the amount of $50,000 is awarded. Mark's face hardened, his expression unreadable. Lauren sobbed, glaring at me through tear-filled eyes. Sarah and I left the courtroom, and as the doors closed behind us, I exhaled deeply. We did it, Sarah said, a triumphant smile turning up the corners of her lips. Yes, I replied, feeling the weight lift ever so slightly from my shoulders. We did. The news of the ruling spread quickly. Mark's career took a sharp nosedive. Colleagues who once sang his praises now whispered behind his back, and Lauren, true to form, left him soon after the financial blow. In the weeks that followed, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but it came with its own burdens. Mark was left to face the rubble of his life, while I began to welcome the peace and clarity that came with closing a painful chapter. On the advice of friends, I planned a vacation, something to mark my newfound freedom. There was still a long road of healing and rebuilding ahead, but for the first time in a long while, hope felt within reach. As I sat by the window that night, looking out over a city that suddenly seemed full of possibilities, I felt a small but growing sense of calm. The scars would remain, but they were now a testament to my survival, my strength, and the start of a new beginning. The weeks after the ruling were like witnessing the slow disintegration of Mark's life. News of the court's decision spread through our old company like wildfire. Colleagues who once respected him now treated him with thinly veiled disdain. I heard from mutual friends that he'd been demoted, his career prospects obliterated. One evening, I was at the entrance of my new apartment building when I saw Mark standing there, disheveled and haunted. "Claire," he started, voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." "Make it quick," I said. I kept my distance, arms crossed, the defensive stance not lost on him. "I've lost everything," he confessed, his eyes searching mine for any sign of sympathy. "Lauren left me. The baby, she's not mine." I felt an inexplicable pang of pity, but quickly squashed it. "You brought this on yourself, Mark. Every bad decision, every lie, it all led here." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight had gone out of him. "I just want you to know I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix everything," I replied coldly, turning and walking inside without looking back. I dedicated myself fully to my work at the law firm, the hustle and bustle becoming a kind of sanctuary. Sarah continued to be my rock, providing both professional guidance and personal support. One Friday afternoon, Sarah approached my desk. "You've been working non-stop, Claire. You should take that vacation you mentioned." "I think I will," I said, smiling for what felt like the first genuine time in ages. I made plans with some friends to go on a week-long trip. The idea of sun and sand, of distant horizons, seemed like the perfect way to cap off this turbulent chapter of my life. On the last day before my vacation, Henry, the head of our firm, called me into his office. "Claire, you've shown remarkable resilience," he said, his tone warm and approving. "We've been discussing your future here, and we believe it's time for you to take on more responsibility." A promotion was being offered. I accepted, feeling a sense of genuine accomplishment. Packing for the trip, I reflected on everything. The pain and betrayal had been like a storm, but now the skies were clearing. Standing on the balcony of my new apartment, I could see the city starting to light up, each glowing window a story of its own. "Time to go," said my friend Julia, honking from the sidewalk below. I grabbed my suitcase and headed out with a smile. The vacation was everything I needed. We laughed, swam, and explored new places, the worries of the past no longer weighing me down. For the first time in years, I felt free. Returning home, I was met with a new sense of purpose. I invested myself fully into my career, the promotion validating my efforts and perseverance. I came back to an unexpected voicemail from Mark. He sounded defeated, seeking closure, or perhaps some final segment of sympathy. I deleted it without listening to it entirely. My life no longer had room for his regrets. In the months that followed, I started planning for more adventures, making new memories that didn't revolve around past traumas. Over time, I found solace not just in my independence, but also in the support from friends and colleagues who rallied around me. In the end, karma had come full circle. Mark had faced his reckoning, and I had found my strength. Standing at the edge of my balcony overlooking the city, I realized that my future was a blank canvas, waiting for me to free from the shadows of my past. As I sipped my coffee, watching the sunrise, I felt a peaceful resolve wash over me. The storm had passed, and a new dawn was breaking, one where I was my own anchor, my life's captain. The journey ahead felt promising, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Embrace whatever came next. Embrace whatever came next. Embrace whatever